Roughly 42% of American adults are considered obese. I mean,
Mm.
think about that for a second.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
It paints a pretty stark picture, right? And well, no wonder there's such intense interest in effective ways to manage weight.
Exactly.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into one of the solutions everyone seems to be talking about, Ozempic. It's a drug initially greenlit for type 2 diabetes that's now also being widely used for weight loss.
And what's really interesting, I think, is how this medication, designed for one specific thing, has just exploded into the public consciousness as a potential answer for, well, a much broader challenge. It raises some really fascinating questions.
It absolutely does. So
Yeah.
our mission here is to really dig into what our sources, we've looked at pieces from UC Davis Health, Columbia University's Psychiatry Department, and the Indiana University School of Medicine, what they tell us about Ozempic and weight loss. We want to understand the mechanics, like how does it actually work?
Yeah.
But also, is it effective? What's the real difference between Ozempic and Wegovy? And crucially, the bigger picture stuff, the ethical side of its widespread use.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Okay, let's get into it. What exactly is Ozempic and how does it produce these effects?
So Ozempic, the generic name is semaglutide. It got FDA approval back in 2017 for adults with type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
It's a weekly injection, and its main job, its primary role, is to lower blood sugar. It does this by basically nudging the pancreas to make more insulin when blood sugar gets high.
So its original purpose was very clearly diabetes management. But we hear about it constantly for weight loss. What's the actual connection? How does that work?
Well, semaglutide is part of a class of drugs called GLP-1 receptor agonists. Okay, so what they do is mimic a natural hormone we all have called glucagon-like peptide 1.
GLP-1.
Yeah.
Bro.
And this hormone does a few things. It helps regulate blood sugar, sure, but it also sends signals to your brain saying, hey, you're full. Ozempic basically turns up the volume on those fullness signals, so you feel less hungry. Plus, it also slows down how quickly food moves through your stomach.
So you feel full for longer.
Exactly. You feel satisfied longer. And interestingly, that effect on digestion, it's actually kind of similar to some physiological changes you see after bariatric surgery.
Huh. Interesting parallel.
So yeah, while it was developed for diabetes, the significant impact on appetite and digestion often results in weight loss. It's a pretty common side effect.
A side effect that seems to have become the main event for a lot of people. So looking at the actual research, does it back this up? Is semaglutide effective for losing weight?
The research on semaglutide itself, the active ingredient, remember, yes, it does support its effectiveness for weight loss, but, and this is a really critical point, our sources hammer home, it works best, significantly best, when it's combined with those lifestyle changes.
Right, the fundamentals. Diet and exercise.
Exactly. A balanced diet, regular activity. It's not, a magic wand you just wave. It's a tool to be used alongside those things.
That's a really important piece. And it's also key to be super clear, like our sources are, that Ozempic itself isn't actually FDA approved for weight loss, correct?
That's absolutely vital, a crucial distinction. Semaglutide is approved for weight loss, but under a different brand name, Wegovy.
Wegovy.
And Wegovy actually contains a higher dose of semaglutide than Ozempic does.
Higher dose, different name, specific approval.
Precisely. And something else to keep in mind, people might hit a plateau. Their weight loss might level off as their body adjusts to the medication. And maybe even more importantly, the studies show that if you stop taking Ozempic, or Wegovy for that matter, there's a very high chance the weight will come back.
Wow. Okay, so it's not necessarily a permanent fix once you stop.
And not usually, no. The weight regain seems pretty significant.
Okay, so both Ozempic and Wegovy have semaglutide. Wegovy has more, and the FDA nod for weight loss. What other key differences should we know about?
Well, beyond the dose and the official FDA label, a really big practical difference often comes down to insurance coverage. Yes.
The money.
Right. Because Ozempic is approved for type 2 diabetes, a recognized medical condition, it's generally more likely to be covered by insurance plans.
Makes sense.
Wegovy, though, being specifically for chronic weight management, well, that often faces more hurdles getting insurance approval. Insurers can be tougher on that.
So even though it's the right drug for weight loss, according to the FDA,
It might be harder to get covered. Yeah. It's a bit paradoxical, both made by the same company. But how insurers view them differs based on that primary intended use.
that access issue tied to insurance is huge. Now let's shift a bit. Our sources do talk about the benefits of weight loss itself, even if someone uses Ozempic off-label.
Oh, absolutely. The research is clear. Losing weight however you achieve it, can definitely lower the risk of serious health problems. Heart issues, for example.
Right. Cardiovascular benefits.
Exactly. And, for some people dealing with obesity, using semaglutide might feel like a less drastic option compared to something like bariatric surgery.
An alternative to surgery? That's interesting. But our experts also seem pretty cautious, maybe even hesitant, about using Ozempic specifically for weight loss if you don't have diabetes.
They are very cautious. A consistent message we saw across the sources is that if you don't have type 2 diabetes, you probably shouldn't be using Ozempic just for weight loss.
So what's the advice then?
The advice is talk to your doctor specifically about Wegovy. That's the one approved for chronic weight management. Use the right tool for the job, basically.
Which brings us neatly to this whole societal aspect that our sources really dig into. The buzz around Ozempic, especially since Wegovy got approved, it's everywhere.
It really is. It's become this kind of cultural phenomenon, and that visibility raises some really important and, frankly, difficult questions.
Like what?
Well, a major one is about equity and access, fairness. These drugs, both Ozempic and Wegovy, they're expensive. We're talking hundreds, maybe over $1,000 a month without good insurance. And like we just said, insurance coverage is patchy, especially for Wegovy. So the worry is that these treatments end up being much more available to people who can afford them out of pocket or who have really comprehensive insurance.
Which could make health disparities even worse.
Potentially, yes. It could widen the gap. And it's not just the cost of access either. There's the actual physical availability.
There's shortages.
Exactly. Both Ozempic and Wegovy were on the FDA's drug shortage list in 2023. That's a direct hit for people with type 2 diabetes who rely on Ozempic, or those with severe obesity needing Wegovy.
So the demand for off-label weight loss use could actually be making it harder for people with the intended medical conditions to get their medication.
That seems to be a real consequence, yes. When demand outstrips supply like this, someone often loses out.
It really makes you step back and think about where we're putting our focus, our resources.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a risk that everyone's so focused on the magic shot that we forget about broader public health approaches?
That's a huge concern raised in the sources. This idea that the excitement around these anti-obesity medications, or AOMs, could sort of distract us. It might pull attention and maybe even funding away from those really crucial public health efforts.
Like promoting healthy eating, exercise, community programs.
Exactly. And addressing the social determinants of health things like poverty, access to healthy food, safe places to be active. If AOMs are seen as the easy fix, we might neglect the harder, but maybe more fundamental, work of prevention.
And the sheer cost, if these drugs become super widespread, that could have major economic ripples for the whole healthcare system, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If a large chunk of the population starts taking these fairly pricey medications long term, overall healthcare spending could go up significantly.
Potentially straining budgets.
Potentially, yes. It could mean less money for other vital health services. Now, proponents might argue there could be long-term savings if obesity complications decrease. But the upfront and ongoing costs are definitely substantial, something we need to grapple with.
One of our sources made a really interesting point that AOMs mainly tackle the biology of obesity. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean for the bigger picture?
Sure. So obesity is really complex, right? It's influenced by biology, genetics, but also environment, behavior, economics, social factors, a whole mix.
Right.
AOMs like Ozempic or Wegovy work on the biological side, appetite hormones, metabolism. They're targeting those mechanisms. But they don't, by themselves, fix the underlying societal issues.
Like food deserts, or the way unhealthy food is marketed.
Exactly. Or lack of safe parks, or the stress associated with poverty that can influence eating habits. If we only focus on the medication, we're not addressing those root causes that contribute to the problem on a population level. It's treating the symptom, perhaps very effectively for an individual, but not the whole system.
So given all this, the high demand, the supply issues, we talk about this question of who should get Ozempic. Becomes really pointed, doesn't it? Sounds like there's a real debate about who gets priority.
There absolutely is. With supplies being tight, there's a strong ethical argument that people with the clearest medical need, type 2 diabetes, severe obesity with complications, should come first, before those looking for, say, moderate weight loss or using it for cosmetic reasons.
And the data actually shows a shift in who's getting it.
It does. It's quite striking. Back in
Right.
2018, something like over 90% of Ozempic prescriptions were for people with type 2 diabetes. Makes sense. That's its approved use.
Okay.
But fast forward to 2023, and that number dropped to about 58%.
Wow, quite a drop.
Yeah, and that difference is largely attributed to the surge in demand for weight loss. It really highlights this tension between the approved use and the off-label trend.
And this prescribing shift has had tangible effects for people needing it for diabetes, hasn't it?
It seems so. The increased demand is definitely a factor in the shortages, making it harder for some diabetes patients to consistently get their prescription filled.
Frustrating, I imagine, and costly.
And costly, yes. In some cases, if insurance gets tricky or they have to pay out of pocket due to shortages, costs can skyrocket. We saw reports mentioning up to $1,600 a month.
Ouch. That's prohibitive for many people.
Absolutely. And another concerning trend is a rise in prescriptions coming from compounding pharmacies.
What's the issue there?
Well, compounding pharmacies operate under different, often less stringent regulations than big manufacturers. So there's potentially more risk of variability in the drug's quality, dosage, or even contamination, more chance for adverse effects.
Okay.
Plus, we're hearing insurance companies are getting stricter about approving Ozempic, likely because they're seeing so many scripts for weight loss, which they often don't cover. So that can loop back to affect diabetes patients, too.
And our sources also suggest that if the main goal is long-term weight management, Ozempic might not even be the most effective approved option anyway.
That's another key point. For pure weight management over the long haul, drugs like Wegovy, remember, higher dose semaglutide, and another one called Zepbound, have actually shown higher average weight loss in clinical trials.
And they are FDA approved for that purpose.
Exactly. They are specifically approved for chronic weight management. Now, we still need more long-term data on keeping the weight off after stopping any of these drugs, but Wegovy and Zepbound are the ones designed and approved for that long-term weight goal.
Which kind of reinforces the argument for reserving Ozempic for diabetes, its intended use.
It does. It really underscores the difference between treating a diagnosed medical need versus seeking weight loss for other reasons, perhaps cosmetic. The priority ethically seems clearer when you frame it that way.
Okay, let's look beyond the immediate supply and access issues.
Yeah.
What about the long term? What do we know or not know about the health impacts of using Ozempic for years?
That's where things get a bit hazy. The truth is, the long-term health effects of using Ozempic beyond, say, a few years are still under investigation. We don't have decades of data yet.
Right. It's relatively new in widespread use.
Exactly. What we do see pretty consistently in studies so far is the weight regain issue. When people stop Ozempic, a large chunk of lost weight, maybe 2/3, studies suggest often comes back within a year.
So sustaining the benefit might mean staying on it indefinitely.
It strongly implies that, yes, ongoing treatment might be necessary for many. It's interesting. In the UK, the official guidance suggests using Ozempic for a maximum of 2 years alongside diet and exercise. They seem cautious about very long-term use.
Are there specific long-term risks being watched?
Yes, researchers are looking into potential links between long-term use and things like gallstones, kidney problems, maybe loss of appetite becoming problematic, and some potential thyroid complications, including a rare type of thyroid cancer noted in animal studies, although the risk in humans is considered low but still monitored.
So still some unknowns there.
Definitely. And these supply problems we keep mentioning, they've unfortunately opened the door to something much more dangerous: counterfeit drugs.
Oh, wow. Fake Ozempic.
Yes, it's a serious concern. The high demand and limited supply create a perfect storm for criminals. They might make fake semaglutide in unregulated labs or just put something else entirely in vials with fake Ozempic labels.
That's incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. These counterfeits could have the wrong dose, no active ingredient at all, or worse, harmful contaminants. People have had serious adverse effects, severe low blood sugar, seizures, infections. The FDA and the World Health Organization have both issued warnings about this.
How do these fakes even get to people?
Often through shady online sellers or unregulated channels, what's sometimes called the gray market. But there's also a risk, especially during shortages, that even legitimate pharmacies might unknowingly buy from less familiar distributors, potentially allowing fakes into the actual supply chain. It's a real challenge to police.
That's frankly terrifying to think about. Now, despite all these concerns, some people still argue for broader access, maybe downplaying the risks. What are those arguments?
Well, proponents often point to the clear effectiveness. They'll say, look, it works for blood sugar, and it helps people lose weight. Those are good things. They might argue that people understand the short-term risks.
And maybe the market will just sort itself out, increase production eventually.
That's often part of the argument, that supply will eventually catch up with demand and things will stabilize. But as our sources point out, eventually could be a long time. And what about the people with diabetes who need it now? The ethical issue doesn't just disappear.
Right.
And some might dismiss the long-term risks, especially if someone's using it just to lose, say, 15 pounds for cosmetic reasons. But again, experts really stress the uncertainty there. We just don't know the full picture of long-term use yet.
And the point about lifestyle changes still stands too.
Absolutely. Ozempic alone, without diet and exercise, just isn't as effective for sustained weight loss, especially compared to drugs like Wegovy that are specifically approved and studied for that long-term purpose, with lifestyle changes built into the protocols.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together from our sources, what's the main takeaway message on using Ozempic for weight loss?
I think the clear consensus from the sources we looked at is the need for prioritization. We should really be focusing these GLP-1 drugs, like Ozempic, on patients with the clearest medical needs, type 2 diabetes primarily, and perhaps severe obesity with related health risks, though Wegovy is the approved tool there.
So caution for general weight loss use.
Yes. While it can be a tool, we need more solid long-term evidence to really know if the benefits outweigh the risks for general weight loss across the board. And layered on top of that are these very real, very current concerns about supply, cost, fair access, and the dangerous rise of counterfeits.
And the risk-benefit calculation just looks different depending on why someone is considering it.
Exactly. It's a very different equation for someone managing a serious disease versus someone seeking cosmetic changes.
Okay, so let's quickly recap our deep dive today. We've learned Ozempic works for weight loss because of its active ingredient, semaglutide, which mimics hormones controlling blood sugar and appetite. But it was developed for type 2 diabetes.
Right. Weight loss was initially a side effect.
And that weight often comes back if you stop. Crucially, Ozempic itself isn't FDA approved for weight loss. That's Wegovy, which has more semaglutide.
A key distinction.
And this difference fuels major issues around access, cost, fairness, and even impacts public health efforts focused on prevention. Prioritizing Ozempic for medical needs seems critical, especially with shortages and the scary threat of fake drugs.
Definitely.
And the bottom line advice from experts: if weight loss is your main goal, talk to your doctor about FDA-approved options like Wegovy. Don't just seek out Ozempic off-label if you don't have type 2 diabetes.
That really sums up the guidance well.
So here's something to maybe chew on after listening. As we see more and more interest in using pharmaceuticals for complex health issues like obesity, what does that mean for us more broadly? What kind of balance should we strike, do you think, between personal choices, public health strategies, and these powerful new medications in trying to build a healthier society? It's definitely a complicated picture with no easy answers.